Now, I'm going to make a quite controversial statement. I don't think the definition of insanity is, as Vas Montenegro put it, the act of repeating something over and over again, expecting different results. That's just called perseverance. Fuck you! I think the true definition of insanity is the inability to look inward, to self-reflect, to be self-aware, and always being willing to do the most outrageous shit, even when it's not good for you. And that definition of insanity is best embodied by Calla Walsh, someone who can be considered the poster child of radical leftism, the epitome of political brain damage, the apogee of mental retardation. But who the hell is she, and why is she even a special case? Well, let's find out. Now, contrary to the image that she likes to portray of herself as a fighter for the ordinary people, Calla Walsh grew up in a quite privileged environment. Born in 2004 in the middle-class city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, to Chris Walsh, an English professor and director of Boston Uni's college writing program, Calla attended two private schools, the Shady Hill School and the all-girls preparatory Windsor School. She began her political journey at the age of 15, helping organize the Boston Youth Climate Strike, obviously emulating the actions of Greta Thunberg. A year later, she volunteered for the presidential campaign of Democrat Senator Elizabeth Warren, followed by managing digital outreach and driving the youth vote for Senator Ed Markey's re-election campaign, as well as volunteering for Michelle Wu's Boston mayoral campaign. This is where we begin to see the origin of Calla's toxicity. In an article published by the New York Times about Democrat Gen Z operatives, Calla is stated to have gone after a Democrat Boston mayor candidate named Dean DePolteau for some of his past tweets criticizing the Black Lives Matter movement, painting him as a white supremacist. This showcased that even within her own party, she didn't see any place for people with differing opinions from her. This was proven in May 2021, when Calla fell out with Senator Markey over his comments about Israel. At that time, the country had experienced several rocket attacks from Gaza and retaliated with their own airstrikes. Markey had issued a statement that criticized both sides, and Calla saw it as ignoring the true issue of settler colonialism and apartheid. This, according to her, permanently disenchanted her from electoral politics, and she went on to join the more left-wing Democrat Socialists of America. In an article she published for Teen Vogue promoting her group, Calla writes, "When I regained employment after Massachusetts reopened, I witnessed capitalism's lack of regard for human life firsthand. Going to work meant risking my life to perform labor because the ruling class had decided that dead frontline workers were just the collateral damage of their profit-motivated reopening. My belief in socialism was strengthened during my time as a frontline worker, but it originated earlier, when I first became engaged in politics through climate organizing. I recognized capitalism as the root cause of the climate crisis and realized that the environmental justice for which I was fighting posed a threat to capitalism's very existence as a system of profit and exploitation." So, pretty much what we're seeing here is the average Hassan Piker script with the same aura of pretentiousness. And while there are many things to criticize capitalism for, such as the aforementioned prioritization of profit over public well-being, there are no explanations for how socialism would be an improvement. She just says that socialism is the only system that will guarantee us a livable planet and life unburdened from economic exploitation, crushing debt, and racial costs, without providing any further and more concrete evidence as to why it will be better. The problem with this article, and pretty much with Calla in general, is that it makes a lot of radical claims without doing even the tiniest bit of research and self-reflection. Sure, capitalism does involve economic exploitation, but so does socialism, and at a far worse scale. In the Soviet Union, for example, yes, you may have had free healthcare and low-cost housing and a job given to you straight out of college, but you also had incredibly low wages and nearly non-existent purchasing power. According to this 1985 Wilson Quarterly article, a Soviet doctor's monthly salary was from 120 to 170 rubles, which was around $158 to $224.
$7? Are you fucking serious? This isn't enough for anything. What are you, a 6-year-old?
Also, according to the same article, to buy 1 dozen eggs, the average Moscow citizen would have to work for 55 minutes, compared to 9 minutes the average Washington citizen would have to work. And to buy a small car, the average Moscow citizen would have to work for 53 months, compared to just 5 months that someone in Washington would have to work.
They said this would be a people's car, Russia's answer to the Mini and the 2CV. But it didn't really work out that way.
Part of the problem is that it costs 3 times more than the annual wage. So that's like calling today's Maserati Quattroporte a people's car.
I also want to point out that class inequality, despite being something that was formally eliminated in the Soviet Union, actually continued to prevail. While the average citizen could only dream of buying a crummy Lada Riva with steering made from cement, the Soviet elite could afford themselves a Gaz Chaika with tons of passenger space and to buy exquisite goods from stores not available for the average citizen. In other words, the Soviet Union was the perfect embodiment of the Orwellian phrase, all are equal, but some are more equal than others. And if you are still holding on to the idea that communism is good for the environment, just know that the Soviets destroyed the biodiverse Aral Sea by diverting waters flowing into it for cotton production, so that entire place is now a desert. Anyways, let's finish up with a communist tangent and get into the more interesting part of Kala's story, that being her ever-increasing radicalization. In late 2022, Calla and other leftist activists traveled to Cuba to observe the local elections. In her article for Cambridge Day, she dedicates several passages to praising Cuba for its democracy. Here are some fine gems. Coming from the fundamentally undemocratic US empire, it was the first time that many participants saw a functional electoral system in which the masses actually participate and in which the majority truly rules. We were surprised by how effectively the voting process moved. There were not long lines at the La Corbata polling site, while in the United States it is typical for voters, especially in the poorer neighborhoods, to wait in lines for hours to cast their ballot. The United States pushes the falsehood that Cuban elections are not competitive. In reality, every Cuban municipality must have at least 2 to 8 candidates running to ensure that voters have a choice. Mind you, she's showering all this praise towards a country where the Communist Party is the only one by law that is allowed to exist. Title 1, Article 5 specifically says that the Communist Party of Cuba is the superior driving force of the society and the state. And that's just regarding parties. You also have the complete lack of media independence, the suppression of free speech, and the non-existence of an independent judiciary, which are all fundamental aspects of a democratic society. I can imagine that next up, Calla would argue that North Korea is actually a democracy just because the country's full name is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. I mean, they do have elections, it's just that you can only vote for one party, and if you express even the slightest bit of dissatisfaction with the regime, you, your family, and your ancestors' ghosts will spend the next 50 years in a gulag. Even if you want to make the argument that Republicans and Democrats are the same because they are capitalists and support Israel, fundamentally, it's better to have a choice of parties with different principles as opposed to having one party and no choice at all. This article showed a radical shift in Calla's rhetoric, from just praising socialist practices to siding with actual authoritarian regimes over ideological alliances, and it served as a prelude of her descent into outright delusion. Having already left the Democratic Socialist group by that time, Calla started promoting a venture called the Mapping Project, whose purpose, according to their site, is to develop a deeper understanding of local institutional support for the colonization of Palestine and harms that we see as linked, such as policing, US imperialism, and displacement/ethnic cleansing, with the ultimate goal being to dismantle these networks. The map on the website showcases a bunch of places in Boston that supposedly contribute to the genocide of Palestinians, such as police stations, private businesses, governmental and non-governmental organizations and universities. So pretty much, Kala was promoting a site that encouraged domestic terrorism, and while that is horrible, it would be nothing compared to what she started doing a year later. On October 7th, 2023, the terrorist group Hamas initiated a wide-scale terrorist attack on Israel, killing people at a nearby music festival, killing families in their homes, and taking hostages. Kala's response to these horrible events was a tweet saying, "Defending their homeland from illegal occupation and genocide isn't ugly Palestinian retaliation. Glory to the Palestinian resistance." Didn't know that murdering innocent people at a music festival was considered self-defense, but I guess the rules of the world have changed now. Makes you wonder, those guys who shot up everyone at Charlie Hebdo offices and clubs in Paris in 2015, are they actually monstrous terrorists, or were they just defending themselves against heinous Islamophobia? She later posted a tweet with a map of the attack saying, "This is what decolonization looks like." And I just want to know something. Since when was kidnapping families and killing them considered decolonization? When Singapore became independent from Britain in 1963, they somehow managed to do it without killing a bunch of Brits. I don't know how they did that, because according to every single leftist, the best way to carry out decolonization is by killing and raping a bunch of women and children. For the rest of October, Kala and her gang of utter schizos took part in various anti-Israel protests as part of her organization Palestine Action US, an offshoot of a similarly named UK-based group that was prescribed as a terrorist organization last year. At the end of the month, the group staged a protest against Elbit Systems, an Israeli military tech company that has a development center in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Weapons companies do not belong in our neighborhood, especially a company like Elbit, which supplies 85% of Israel's drones, vehicles, bullets, and surveillance technologies. Not only that, but they test these weapons on Palestinians and then market them as battle-tested.
Although the protest started peacefully, at 11:15 a.m., some of the crowd broke through the barricades and began throwing smoke bombs and eggs at the building and the police, as well as vandalizing the company's building using graffiti. 9 people, including Kala, were arrested and charged with vandalism and disorderly conduct, although these charges were dismissed 2 years later. A month later, Kala and several other protesters broke into another Elbit building in New Hampshire, spraying various slogans and breaking windows. They were subsequently charged with conspiracy to destroy property, attempted burglary, riot, and criminal mischief. Kala and another protester, Sophie Marika Ross, subsequently posted $20,000 bail. All of them were looking at sentences of 3.5 to 7 years in prison, but unfortunately the case did not go to trial, as Kala and her gang ultimately pleaded guilty to misdemeanors and received 60-day jail sentences with 2-year suspended sentences for 3 years. During this period, Kala became associated with a man named Fergie Chambers, a communist activist and member of the billionaire Cox family, which owns a global conglomerate named after them that provides cable TV services, used car services, and owns multiple TV and radio stations. Fergie pretty much organized the protest against Elbit in New Hampshire and paid $50,000 to bail out Walsh and the other protesters. In a profile about him by Rolling Stone, Fergie makes his views clear. "We need a revolution. I see success as the dissolution of the United States government and an end to the US empire. Because I say that a lot, combined with the money, it makes me a target." The article also provides other information. Many of Chambers' geopolitical positions are broadly contentious, and he appears to take glee rubbing them in people's faces. He supports Russia's war on Ukraine and frequently refers to Vladimir Putin as a great man. In 2022, he traveled to the Donbass region to write about ethnic Russians in the area who welcomed Russia's military presence. Even putting toxic politics and class contradictions aside, there's this. Chambers can be a bit of a dick. He often speaks in proclamations, as if every word were the gospel truth, and any who disagree are beneath contempt. He talks of the things he hates, Zionists, liberals, his dad, etc., with a fiery passion, and casually refers to people and organizations as enemies he's at war with. This despite some of those people and organizations having been his allies in the recent past. He's often at odds even with those who broadly agree with his politics. While the article does also try to portray Fergie as a complex man, you do get the sense that he's less of a Che Guevara and more of a mentally unstable, spoiled brat trying to cosplay as Che Guevara. And I think that's a very big trend amongst people like Kala and Fergie. They're a bunch of rich kids trying to cosplay as revolutionaries, as if that will give their life any more meaning than if they did not cosplay as revolutionaries. The article also mentions that although Fergie has been in and out of mental institutions, he himself rejects the mere concept of mental disorders. I don't believe in the biological existence of personality disorder. Things like bipolar, BPD, depression, anxiety, PTSD, they're conditions based on the society we live in. In a secular capitalist world, the psychiatric framework is the most effective form of social control. I was expressing dissenting political ideas when I was a kid. Antisocial personality disorder is characterized by having extreme beliefs. Extreme in reference to what? Who defines that? Mind you, this bloke is over 40 years old, and yet he's still espousing the same beliefs as a midwit high schooler who just read the Communist Manifesto for the first time. The problem with people like Fergie and Kala is that they think they have some elevated level of intelligence that allows them to espouse opinions as if they were fact, all the while ignoring the various nuances that our society is built upon. They constantly associate capitalism with evil because they only take in information about how bad it has been for society, and at the same time, they disregard instances where it has been good, such as in the case of Poland, which went from one of the poorest Eastern European nations at the end of the Cold War to an economic powerhouse that is set to outpace the UK in terms of economic prosperity. I mean, you would think that with all the cultural capital that Fergie and Kala have thanks to their privilege, they would conduct themselves in a very intelligent and dignified manner, and yet all they've done is isolate themselves in an echo chamber and adopt a warmonger mentality that derides modern humanist values and embraces third worldist backwardness. But if you thought Kala was delusional now, oh boy, you haven't seen anything yet. In July 2025, Kala went to Iran to partake in a festival called International Memorial for the Media Martyrs of the Struggle Against the Zionist Regime. Well damn, what a mouthful. During her speech at the festival, Kala would go completely off the rails, espousing terrorist rhetoric and calling for the destruction of America and Israel.
We all have a duty when we go back to the countries we come from to share the truth we saw here and to struggle against Zionism and imperialism. Glory to all the martyrs, glory to the axis of resistance. May we see victory within our lifetimes. Margbar Amerika, Margbar Israel.
She also recorded a video of herself in a hijab praising the Iranian regime for its indigenous resistance to US imperialism.
I think it is the greatest honor of my life to be visiting the Islamic Republic of Iran right now in this moment where it is under genocidal siege by the United States, by the Zionist entity. It is a great honor to be surrounded by the indigenously produced drones and missiles and military equipment that are actively resisting this genocide and imperialism.
Well, where the fuck do I even begin? I mean, not only does Iran supply drone tech to the Russians so that they can bomb more Ukrainian military targets, also known as civilian apartment blocks, but also they oppress their own citizens and deny them the freedoms that people like Kala in the West take for granted. Also, what's with the implication that just because a drone is indigenous, that means that whatever it's used for is good? That's like saying, ah yes, the Ebola, Congo's indigenous-made disease. Just because it was developed by the Iranians and not some foreign conglomerate does not mean that it's going to be used for benevolent purposes. Even if criticism of US and Israeli foreign policy is to some extent justified, the last thing these radicals care about is the lives of the people living in totalitarian regimes like Iran. Their support for such governments usually boils down to contrarianism, genuine terrorist sympathies, or the delusional idea that just because these people are brown and Muslim, they must be be the perpetual victims of white oppression. And you could make the argument that she's just a grifter like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens, but I would find it very difficult to believe that a genuine grifter would actually go to Iran and say death to America and then come back and expect everything to be okay and not be arrested. To be honest, I don't think Kala cares much for her self-preservation. In fact, in an interview from October 2025, she outright said that she is proud to be labeled a terrorist.
I do not regret the action that we did. If I could go back, I would do it again, and I would do it better. My regret is that we didn't, raise that facility to the ground. The best thing we can do to help Palestine is to start a revolution here, wherever we find ourselves, but particularly in the US-led imperialism, which is our ultimate enemy. And certainly the Axis of Resistance, the Palestinian resistance, understands that. The prison and jail system, the carceral system in the US is a form of genocide. It's modern slavery. When the word terrorist is used, by the West, it's synonymous with accusing us of resistance. It's accusing us of fighting for liberation. And so really that should always be taken with a badge of honor.
There are things that should be protected by the First Amendment, and then there are things that should be punished by a lifetime of surveillance. Kala also recently said on Twitter, in response to the strikes on Iran, that every single US and quote-unquote Israeli official is a legitimate target wherever they are in the world. Beyond outright calling for the deaths of government officials, which I'm pretty sure is a charge, I don't understand why she quote-marked the word Israeli. Maybe she thinks that being an Israelite is a false nationality and as such it should not even exist, which really does not help her case of being an anti-Zionist as opposed to what she actually is, an anti-Semite. The question that I am left with at the end of the day is, what motivates a person from a respectable family and neighborhood to start promoting terrorism and embracing the title of Enemy of America? There's definitely some psychological issue that we don't know about, but I believe that this has been primarily possible through the permeation of radical rhetoric which claims to fight against imperialism and all that is bad, but in the process also advocates for imperial and dictatorial practices of others just because they go against America. Not only does this ignore the fact that America, like every other nation, is nuanced, capable of being good and bad, but it also hands over the reins of power to those who will definitely abuse it and cause more widespread suffering than America ever has. And for that reason, I think Calla Walsh should be treated as a threat to society. There should be efforts made to calling this person and their logical fallacies out, and if necessary, put her in prison. She's clearly damaged goods at this point. She's not going to change her political views because she's been programmed to ally with the savages. So I think if she wants to be an enemy of the Western world, then let's make her one. Regardless of where the story goes, thank you for watching. I've been Asparagus, and I'm gonna need to do something about my throat. It's been really bad these past couple of days, so bye-bye.
I've heard it 1,000 times before, and it's just not that funny anymore.